Hi, welcome to this our special broadcast in association with the Talyllyn Railway, talking about all things Awdry and the connection to the Talyllyn Railway. Tonight, you're joined by my dear friend Luke Ryan.
Hello.
All things Awdry and the connection to the Talyllyn Railway. I've got tonight. You're joined by my dear friend. There we are, live TV. It's like the 1953 broadcast with the models. So yeah, I'll do that again. We're joined by my dear friend Luke Ryan.
Hello.
And myself, me, Tom Foster. So, yeah, why are we here, Luke? Why are we here?
So obviously at the minute, the world is very much weird. And small affairs like the Talyllyn Railway, as much as they may seem big to us in the grand scheme of things, with everything going on, they're not able to open, and probably going to be one of the last places to be able to open once this is all sorted. So, they're doing fundraisers, and this is essentially, we're going to have a chat about Reverend Awdry, his connections to the Talyllyn, the Skarloey, everything to do with that, and particularly his layout. Because there's a couple of auctions going on that the Talyllyn are holding, where you can bid on a chance to operate the Farquhar layout that the Reverend Awdry built and operated himself at many exhibitions.
There is a link to it in the description for this video, which will take you straight there. So without further ado, yeah, I think it's very much Awdry, the Railway series. Thomas has touched us, and it's a big part of our lives. Luke, what's your earliest sort of memory of the Awdry effect?
Oh, well, I've essentially grown up my whole life with Thomas, or the Railway series being a part of it all the way through. My mum once said that apparently my first word was Thomas. So there you go. If that doesn't set up an interest for life, I don't know what does. Yeah, no. Grew up very much on like the early VHSs, and also I had the big collection books, which had all 26 of Wilbert's books compiled into one big one. So I very much grew up with the television series and the original books side by side. And it's led me on to having an amazing, volunteering career with the Talyllyn and back where I'm from, Preston, and the Ribble Steam Railway there. Without, the railway series being a thing, I don't think I would have gone into railway, the interest of railways. And that's a good story for a lot of heritage volunteers as well, especially from the younger generations.
And same for me, really. It's a sort of very similar story. My first toy model was a James the Red Engine. That was the first one I got given. And again, yeah, it's sort of I did some volunteering 10 years ago at the Moors, done a bit at the Wensleydale. I now am a volunteer at East Lancs, and hopefully next year I'll be joining you down at the TR.
Fingers crossed.
Absolutely. So, and of course, as well as it being sort of working on the full size, we like to work on the small size, don't we? We have
very much so, yeah.
I was going to say, I'll show you a couple of mine. Mine, I'm afraid, I'm not as Luke's got some nice gadgetry going on. I'm afraid I'm just a case of hold a model up. So here we have a certain Western locomotive. It is Duck. Hold up there. It's got the correct number. And hello, I recognise this gentleman in the fireman's seat. It is actually a scan of Luke Ryan, who's
3D print.
Doesn't look like he's doing much firing.
No.
But that's one of my models. Well, there's some others behind. If I duck down, you shall see on the top shelf of my Awdry corner. There's a Thomas that's still not finished. Percy and Toby. So,
yeah. So I'm mainly modelling on the topic of obviously like Awdry's models, more this size, 009, of the Skarloey engines, which we all know are based on the Talyllyn. So Skarloey here, which is Talyllyn, and I'll do this. And then you've got Rheneas here, Dolgoch. I'll go the other way with this one. His name's there. So Handel, Oh, slightly out of focus.
He doesn't look happy. He doesn't look happy. Look at him.
Obviously, that's Sir Hayden. Peter Sam here, looking a bit more chipper, and that's Edward Thomas. Duncan here, which is obviously Douglas on the railway. And I do have a small little friend who is, people don't know, and we'll go a little bit more into this. Now, this character's called Fred. He's based on Alf, which is the unsung workhorse of the Talyllyn, I think. Only ever was mentioned in one book by Christopher Awdry. But yeah, it's based on Alf at the Talyllyn, and I don't think many people realise the character exists. So I modelled him.
That is lovely. Can you show off the tash?
Oh, of course. As you can see just at the front there.
Look at that.
It's got a lovely Ted Glenn tash. Well, yeah, so that's
the TR in the chat saying our very own legend.
He is. It's criminally underloved.
Well, Luke is a bad influence because I'm now also modelling the Skarloey. I've got a couple of my examples to show here. Here is our grumpy engine. There is Sir Handel, which I finished, I think it was last week. So that's everyone's favourite number 3. Like you, Luke, of course, I've done the sleeper under the under the buffer beam. And then the other one I've brought to show is Cora. And I followed Luke's advice on this one because I've modelled her with the door open, which was rather hard work cutting through that plastic. But
it would be very nice to see the real Cora van number 6 back up running, and I believe there has been a little bit of surveying work done on the van itself. So fingers crossed, should see number 6 back on the TR in a few years. Obviously, it's only been surveyed at the minute, so who knows?
Lovely. No, that'd be great to see. So, as you've mentioned, Luke, we've got there's a certain layout.
Yes.
In the Awdry study, and I've got some things set up to show our viewers some photographs of said layouts. Now this is Farquhar Mark II. There was the Farquhar Mark I, but then there is a pre-Mark I that we were talking about today, wasn't we, Luke?
Yes. So Wilbur Awdry in 1927 with his brother George Awdry, who surprisingly, I don't think many people realise the impacts and kind of contributions George Awdry made to the world of Sodor. He was very, very much of a guiding hand as Wilbert was, and we wouldn't have what we know as Sodor without George as well. But yeah, so in 1927, so this predates all of the Railway Series books by just over 20 years. They made a little model railway called Quarry, which was shortened to Farquhar, and that's where the name Farquhar comes from. It's a squashed together Quarry, and he carried that over from his childhood childhood, kind of like teenage, early 20s years with his brother.
Just also meant to say, as we're sort of going through this tonight, we will jump across the questions that are being asked.
Yes, please send in questions.
Also, Luke, if you could just keep an eye on Facebook to see if any questions come in there, because I was looking at the feed here.
Nice.
They're marvellous. Hold on a second. There was one I just saw, and I'm just going to try and scroll back to it. There we go. Paul Thompson asked, why the sleeper under the buffer beam? Track safety. Just like the real number 3, there was an issue with the tread on the tires of the wheels, and essentially poor number 3 used to fall between the rails or derail itself occasionally, which in the books it's often because Sir Handel's grumpy and doesn't want to do something, but actually it was a problem with number 3. So the sleeper was there, am I right, Luke, as it made it easier to use a piece of rail to get it back onto
So what the sleeper did was essentially it stopped the loco falling down as far. So it would be, as you say, easier to get. The wheels wouldn't be all the way down into the ground. It would be like slightly, they'd be floating essentially. The loco would be resting on the wooden beam under there, just to keep it higher and easier to put back on.
Yeah. Right. I'm going to do some screen sharing now. So these were some photos that you took, didn't you, Luke?
Yes.
Right. So if I just do this, and then we click onto, there we go. That should be coming through now. Is that right, Luke? Is that coming through?
Yep, I can see that there. So that is the layout, which is being currently auctioned to have a lovely operation session for. And if you win it, it's for a group of 8 people, I believe, to come and have a half-day experience at your convenience. Mutually arranged convenience with the railway to get it sorted. It'll be a private running session for you and 7 others.
And what's the deal behind the James on the layout, Luke?
Yeah. So that's actually my own model. Me and a couple. I was down. This would have been last year in the summer, and we went to go and use the study to essentially just check over, make sure that everything was there. Just a general checkup, really, on the state of it all, making sure it was all fine. And I had my models because I'd been displaying it. We had a little model railway exhibition that weekend, and I was very kindly allowed to place my James on the layout.
Lovely, looks the part, really does. So this leads on to Wilbert's actual track plan for Mark II, which we have here from a railway modeler article. And the actual what you see in the study, I think, is literally that those top rectangle boards on the plan. Would I be right with that, Luke?
I'd say you would be.
And as you can see, the plan, and Wilbert sadly never got round to sort of envisioning this, because this was designed when he'd retired and he'd moved to Stroud, and it was designed to fit in a room. And as you can see, you've got this whole section that came around, and he incorporated Ellsbridge, which is the next station, the next main station down the line from Farquhar. But sadly, he never got around to doing it. He never also got around to doing what you'll notice at the bottom, which was a layout of the Skarloey.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting. It's very similar to his Mid-Sodor layout that people may or may not have seen, which is very kind of like very compact into the same space. And it's a shame he never built it.
Yeah, it is, because of course he built the models because they are the ones that you can go and see, which are in the display cabinet in the museum at Towyn. But essentially, even though it's highly compressed, everything's there: Crosnickern, Glennock, Renaeus, and Skarloey. Yeah. Which sorry.
Seen a question from Luke Gauchi. I'm sorry, I'm probably butchering your surname there. I'm so sorry. All these layouts were built. Was it the 60s? 60s it was built. So this is long before BCC was invented.
Yeah, absolutely. So Skarloey Railway, Talyllyn, how did it all sort of connect into the railway series? Back in 1951, which is I think the same year that Henry the Green Engine was published. Yeah. Wilbert, I'm just going to turn off the screen sharing for the moment.
There's my James. That was on the layout.
Lovely.
Yeah, so that's that there.
Looks the part.
Let's go back to my mug.
So back in 1951, Wilbert was sent an article from the Birmingham Times, and the headline was 8 miles of railway to play with and real trains for £1 a year. That railway in question was the Talyllyn Railway, and this was when Tom Rolt and many of the early pioneers of the TR were essentially trying to save this railway that honestly could have disappeared and been ripped up and would have just been talked about in history books.
Mm.
So if I just turn to this book here, which is very worth getting. It is the Reverend Awdry's autobiography. There's some few little snippets. I'm not going to read it all, so don't worry. Essentially, Wilbert wrote at once to the Talyllyn Railway Preservation Society asking for details of membership. These were duly received, and off went a cheque for £2, one for membership, Wilbert explained, and the other for initial donation. I am sorry I can't afford more. The receipt for this payment carries the number 79, which places Wilbert within the first 100 people to respond to the appeal. By May 1951, there were 664 members, and almost £2,000 had been raised. In acknowledging Wilbert's donation, the Society's treasurer, Patrick Garland, another one of the TR pioneers, wrote that they had acquired from British Railways 2 further locomotives, both saddle tank engines, that had worked the now defunct Quarry Railway. These engines were to be renamed Sir Hayden and Edward Thomas in honour of the owner and manager of the Talyllyn. So you will see, wrote Patrick Garland, that there is a possibility that a Thomas the Tank Engine will finish up on the Talyllyn Railway, to which Wilbert replied, I hope that Edward Thomas will behave and not follow the example of my Thomas. Neither correspondent could have imagined quite how close an association would eventually be formed between Thomas and his friends and the engines of the Talyllyn Railway. So essentially, this is what starts it off. Now, that year, Wilbert was desperate to get down to the TR. But sadly, Margaret, his wife, had already booked a holiday in East Anglia, which also is how Toby came about. So, of course, if he'd gone to the TR that year, we might
not have had Toby.
Might not have had Toby.
So,
essentially, that was the start of it. Wilbert volunteered. I think this is how different things are today, Luke. He turned up and was told, yeah, you're doing some guarding tomorrow or next week of your holiday.
Where I'm currently still training. Well, assistant guard now, so hopefully not too long. Fingers crossed. If I was hoping to be down probably right now, but sadly, what can you do?
Just to have a break from that, we've had a question come in from Steve. What is the current location and state of the MSR layout and its engines and rolling stock? Haven't heard anything new on it since the blurry Pegnacion site days. It used to live at Cadeby, and then when Cadeby closed, I believe it's now with
Christopher Awdry at the minute. Michael White, who a lot of people probably know from replicating the Reverend's models and the Far Cry layout. It was quite a while ago. I think he wrote to someone, it might have been Christopher, and there was confirmation that he still has the layout. There's not been any pictures of it since, but yeah. So we don't really know the current state, but we do know it's in the Awdry family hands, so it's definitely going to be looked after.
Messaging from Luke. Do you have the video of Awdry pushing the slate? We were talking about this, Luke, and actually this is quite a good segue into this. That is not the Reverend Awdry. If you're referring to the footage from Railway with a Heart of Gold, sorry. A lot
of people do assume that is the Reverend Awdry, and with the old blurry copy on YouTube, I can see it, but once you see it in full HD, you can tell it's not him. But Tom, you do have a video of him at the Talyllyn ready to show it.
I do have a video of the Reverend Wilbert Awdry volunteer at the Talyllyn. So if we just go on to screen share.
We're hoping someone would either ask about that or we'd just get to it.
So just bear with me a second. Luke, can you confirm that you can now see this?
Yeah, I can.
Right, let me just make it.
So this was in when the BBC came, and in the 1957, the BBC came and did a live television train, and he was the guard of the television train, which was immortalized in. Is it? No, it would be. Which book is it again?
Little Old Twins from book 14, Little Old Engine. Last story.
That's right. Yeah, it's from Little Old Engine. And that does have the TV train.
Just to say, don't worry, there's nothing wrong with your speakers. There isn't any sound on this. This was filmed by the late Pat Whitehouse. Some may know the name from Railway Roundabout. So here we go. just confirm, can you see that full screen at your end, Luke?
Yes, yes.
Lovely. Okay, here we go.
So yes, on the left there, you can see his guard's whistle dangling down.
And his pipe.
Yes.
He'd always have his pipe. I'll let this run on for just a little moment because some for those who've read the book. Actually, I'll just skim ahead a little bit.
Yeah,
who know the story, you'll see it is. There we go. It is just like what you see in book 14 of the Railway series with the TV crew.
Yeah, and it's obviously very interesting that you see what kind of happens in the books is very much either what the Reverend heard from people he knew or happened to him directly, such as the TV train and the refreshment lady, as much as I want to deny it.
So there we go. And that video can be found on the BFI website. And if I'm right, the title of it, I can't find it now, is something like Kada Idris. I'll try and put a link in it at some point. So there we go. We will go back. Yeah. Lovely.
So that's available on, like you say, the BFI, along with Railway with a Heart of Gold, Talyllyn Summer, and a lot of other really, really interesting videos, which I'd give a watch if you want to have a little look into the past.
So speaking of Wilbert's volunteering, it's very interesting how things went on his first sort of stint as guard. And I'll read this excerpt, which was in the Talyllyn 125 newsletter. He says, "As guard, my chief boobs at first concerned the van brake. At that time, apart from the brake on the engine, the van had the only other brake on the train. I would forget to put it on at stations, thus sometimes starting a heavily loaded up train difficult with tight couplings. Sometimes, conversely, having screwed it on when stopping, I would forget to ease it off after giving the right of way. This lapse would be followed by the unmistakable sound of the locomotive's slip. Indignant whistles from up front would remind me of my error, which I quickly corrected." Which is a nice little tale. And of course, the infamous story with Peter Salmon, the refreshment lady, was down to what happened with Wilbert, because he gave the right of way, leaving Abergyn Olwyn, and initially left the poor refreshment lady behind. Would I be right, Luke? I've heard that that's happened on other occasions, not just with the Reverend.
Yeah. I was the guard that I was working with one day. He said that happened to me. I did it. So it did seem like it wasn't an isolated incident.
So this follows nicely on to, I think it was at the end of that holiday. It was at the end of the second holiday, because he started going down fairly regular to Towyn to volunteer. Tom Rolt basically said, "Is there a way that you could put our engines, our railway, into your books?" And this is another little excerpt from the Reverend's autobiography. In his talk about the Talyllyn, Wilbert described his involvement with the railway as having given him a new, intensely creative and rewarding experience in life. It was inevitable that at some point he would find a way of meeting Tom Rolt's request to immortalise the Talyllyn engines in the railway series. Although it took Wilbert a few years of irregular thought, followed by lengthy correspondence with his brother George, he eventually devised an imaginary railway that would be complementary with the Talyllyn. It was 1953, and Wilbert wrote to George, "I have just worked out some notes on the history, etc. of the Skarloey Railway. On the whole, it has developed well, and I've drawn freely on the Festiniog, Corris, Welsh Highland, Crozer, and Talyllyn Railways for inspiration." And I think that's the thing to remember, that it isn't. Wilbert was quite clever. It's not a carbon copy of the Talyllyn.
As much as you've got a lot of different views and locations which you can go and visit in real life and be like, "Huh, that's the books," or even with the oh, hello, James. I didn't do that.
Typical James.
Yeah, no, and he. In the TV series as well, there's a distinct shot looking down a path, and there's a gate and there's a station, and that's based on Dolgoch, on Dolgoch Station, and it's stuff like that. There are some very distinguished, like you can tell that it is the, you can tell the things, but also as Tom says, you might not realise that there's the tunnels based on Aberglaslyn on the Welsh Highland, or Glennock stations based on Abercleffeni on the Corris. There's small little details from other railways.
Which that flows nicely, Luke, into the next set of photos we've got, which actually I'm going to show illustrations and then areas on other railways which clearly inspired the Reverend and George, as we've said, because George Awdry was a massive part in developing the Skarloey Railway. Yeah. So we'll go back onto screen share. Hold on a second. Okay, so first of all, we have here, this is a very early map of Sodor. Is that sharing okay, Luke?
Yeah, that's fine.
You'll notice there's some interesting spellings. Skarloey hasn't got a K in it. But for all, sort of, the important factor is that is pretty much how Sodor remains throughout its development. And actually, the rough plan you can see of the Skarloey, I don't know if my cursor is visible going around there, but if it is, that is the Skarloey Railway. And essentially, it doesn't really change throughout later maps that Awdry developed. So if we now skip ahead, you should all be looking at a nice illustration of Crovansgate sheds. Would that be right, Luke? Is that coming through?
Very much so, yeah.
Luke, you are modelling this, so do you want to talk us through this and its with Andre?
If you give me a second, I will grab the building. So as you can see, that you've got the main loco sheds as a single road, and the carriage shed, which is all very nice and wooden sided, brick at the bottom, and the little shack to the side. And if you have a look at the real sheds,
let me just put a photo. Oh no, sorry, that's another illustration there of the early years of what that's probably about 1952, supposedly on Skarloey.
Yeah.
And there we go. That's a photo I took last year with you, Luke.
Yeah. So the main sheds you want to look at are the ones to the right.
If my cursor appears, I'm putting a
So Tom's circling there. That's the main loco shed, and then to the right you've got the carriage shed, and you can very much see they're very much based on the books, very much based on it. Where the shed to the left is here in this picture, that's North Shed. There used to be a little barn, and Talyllyn was parked under there when it was out of service in the 50s, and that's what Skarloey's little shack in the railway series is based on as well. So if you go back to the illustration, Tom.
Yeah.
Yeah, the little shack Skarloey's underneath there is meant to be kind of based on the old barn. And that used to be at Pendray. Yeah, so that's again a little thing that I don't think is ever explicitly stated, but it's once you see the pictures, it's very much like, yeah, that's got to be that.
Yeah. So as we move up the line, we get to Crosney Kern, which I should have there we go. There's Peter Sam. There he is. And again, what you notice in the first book, which actually I'll just hold up here. This was the first Skarloey book in the railway series, which is that visible, Luke? Because I can't see my main screen at the moment. So
yeah, thereabouts.
there we go. Four little engines. It's very clear. Many of you will know the history with Wilbert, that he didn't have the best of relationships with his third illustrator. See Reginald Dolby. It's very clear from book 10, Four Little Engines, that Wilbert gave him a lot of material to work from, as you will see, because for these next illustrations I'm going to show, I've got the actual photo that they're based on. So there is Peter Sam approaching Crosney Kern, and here is Edward Thomas approaching Crosney Kern.
Yeah, just screams. So it's just got such a lovely look to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, I do. It looks like Edward Thomas is going at a fair pace there. I also love the fact that it's well known that the Talyllyn Railway's track wasn't in the best of condition, and if you look at the angle of the coaches looking back, they're gradually leaning more and more.
And the siding where those wagons are is completely overgrown.
Indeed, it is.
Yeah. Speaking of Crosney Kern, just quickly, it's my little shed building there, based on that, which is based on Rhythironen station, which is, as we said, the base kind of inspiration for Krosnokerne station. If you translate Krosnokerne from Sudric into English, I think it's the crossing of the Ford Ash, or something along those lines. And if you translate Rhythironen from Welsh to English, you get Ashford. So it's very much, you've got those very clear Welsh and Sudric connotations when you translate to English. And same with Glennock. Glennock translates to Blue Hill. Bringlass, the real place that was Glennock was based on, translates from Welsh to English roughly, I think, to Blue Hill as well.
It does.
So they're essentially called the same thing, just in two different languages.
Which brings us on to Glennock. Glennock is a favourite of mine because it's a bit different, as you will see in a second, because the actual station isn't based on... It's supposedly Bringlass for location-wise. It's the next station from Krosnokerne, but it's... Hold on, we'll get to it. There we go. There's the illustration. It is quite different because it is not based on Bringlass. It is based on Aberlourpenny, which was the terminus station on the Quarry Railway, which is where Edward Thomas and Sir Hayden originally came from. And again, you will see here, so it's a lovely illustration, this, and it's based on a photograph, which I'm happy to share with you here.
There you go.
It's that is Aberlourpenny. It's interesting in the Island of Sodor book, which I've got behind me. There is a copy of which in the study at Towyn as well. It talks about how the chapel, as you can see, there's a chapel there in the background, and of course there is on the original illustration, is joined to the station. In actual fact, the one at Aberlourpenny wasn't part of the station. It's a bit further back, but it does look relatively close in that photograph. But I think
that's the real Glennock,
which is one that I would like to model at some point. I'd like to just model it all. I haven't got the money or space, but we can dream.
Sorry, I just seen a question from Reese, which I don't know if you've got any pictures from, but the passing loop that's generally seen in the Skarloey books is Quarry siding, which is, as British Gypsum for Ben has just replied, it was north of the station.
I think Ben's on about, because me and British Gypsum 4, our friend Ben, who's many of you will know from Awdry Corner, we discussed about where the loop is, and Ben and I reckon it's where it is at Aberlourpenny, just it would be north of the station on Skarloey, south on Aberlourpenny. There was a loop and there was a pit at Aberlourpenny as well, which was quite interesting. Also worth, I'll put this in just because Ben's joined us in our discussion. Ben and I worked out that the length of the Skarloey is just over 13 miles. Not going off the maps. If you actually measure it on the map that's behind Luke, it comes to 22, which we all think is that's like triple.
Going off of what the Reverend's written in lots of different places, he goes into the mileage in the text, and it all adds up to about 13 miles. Which I can see the engines doing after been working on them a bit.
I think Ben and I both agreed. We reckon the Reverend mentions that there is only one water stop at Dolgoch, and we think you'd have to have one at Glennock.
Probably. Yeah. So again, that's another thing where the Skarloey does differentiate from the Talyllyn. It's a bit longer.
Yeah.
But yeah.
If we carry on along the lovely Skarloey Railway on this beautiful Friday evening, we come to this bridge, and actually it was Ryan, who many of you will know from SIF, who put me onto this one. Is that there's it's in book 14. You see Skarloey with Cora crossing over a girder bridge, and I will let me bring it up, and I can find there's Aberlourpenny. There we go. And I've always thought it's a really lovely, iconic scene. You'll remember I was talking about how Wilbert had mentioned that the Festiniog, the Welsh Highland, the Corris, the Talyllyn were all inspirations for areas of for the development of the Skarloey. This is an example of a bit of Welsh Highland. This is up near the Aberglaslyn Pass. So it's near Bedgellet, and there is said bridge. Has that come through? I am
Yeah, no, it's there. Yeah, no, it's one of those little instances of where you can actually genuinely see the other railway inspirations. Because they, like I say, it's kind of like it's 75% Talyllyn, and then the other 25% is filled in with Corris, Welsh Highland, and Festiniog mainly, and Chrysler tramway, as you say.
Which moves us on to the tunnel section, which I fully admit on my first visit to the TR, I did think, where's the tunnel? And in fairness, the tunnel is quite a focal point for a good few stories in the railway series. If we go back to the layout article, we were talking about what Wilbert with the track plan that I showed earlier. Wilbert says in there when he was developing the stations and the layout and the track plan, he mentioned that the Glennock portal, so the opposite one that you're looking at now in this illustration, was based possibly on Molwyn, which was, I think it's the old Molwyn before the deviation on the Festiniog.
Yeah, so on your up journey, the tunnel portal is very much the old Molwyn tunnel entrance, and then this exit here, which is the Reneus end of the tunnel, as a couple of people have just said in the chat, is very much based on Aberglaslyn. Well done, Reese and Chris.
This is an old photo because
no track. But yeah, so the Reneus end of the tunnel does look very much like Aberglaslyn, while the other end is based on the old Molwyn tunnel.
And you see that back in the early the first time we see it in Little Old Engine, where Duncan does his rock and roll.
Yeah, it looks much. It's very, very Aberglaslyn there.
I'm just having a quick look to see, just to check that there's no questions coming in via Facebook that we might be ignoring.
I've been checking. Pretty much all of our audience is here, I believe.
That's fine, lovely. And then we come to where is it? The viaduct at Dolgok. Sorry, Reneus. It's easy.
Oh, you've ruined it now.
Sorry, I'll leave now. So we have the Reneus, which Reneus is essentially Dolgok on the Talyllyn. And I have a lovely photo. Now this is quite a special photograph, this next one, because this is believed to be the earliest photograph of Talyllyn.
It is.
Some of you may notice that obviously how little the vegetation is in that photograph compared to today, because you can't get a shot like that now.
I believe it may be the earliest photograph of the railway, not just of the engine. Because it's 1867.
Interesting where Van 5 is as well in the train.
Very much so, yeah.
So I'll just
so just looking in the comments, the Vale of Rydal hasn't ever really been mentioned in any of the Reverend's like notes or writings on the railway. So the Vale of Rydal is, I think I agree, it's very much more I think you'd more get the scenery of the Vale of Rydal than anything else. But yeah, and Steve, as we were saying before, the Skarloey is definitely longer than the TR, where the TR 7.25 miles, the Skarloey is roughly 13 miles. And Golden Eagle is because when they built the line, thank you, Tom. When they built the line, they were planting trees, and they've all grown now. And that's literally it. When they built it, they lined the permanent way with trees to protect the line and stuff. And they've all grown over now. And it's a case of those trees have been there as long as the railway has. Well, thereabouts.
Yeah, I mean, it could be recent. Maybe the Reverend had, given some Vale of Rydal sort of photographs to John T. Kenny to work from. For me personally, I've always thought the shots with Peter Sam around the tunnel looked rather Welsh Highland-ish. So moving on, I think we're nearing the passenger terminus of the line. So I will go back to sharing. So I think if we must move along here. No, we've done that one. Here we go. So here we are at Skarloey Station. Now, this one is rather special to me because some of you may know I am in the process of building stock and will be building an exhibition layout of Skarloey Station. Essentially, from what we can work out, which we've researched with Luke and my friend Ben, is that Skarloey Station track plan is essentially Abergynolwyn. The difference you have is how its location is. It goes around the lake. It's far closer to Skarloey Lake than Abergynolwyn is to Talyllyn Lake, and essentially the lake at Skarloey is in like a crater, and the railway runs on the lip of the crater. So visually, where in that illustration you can see Skarloey in the train and there's the trees, there should be a gap in the trees at some point because Wilbert states in the Island of Sodor book that you can see from the platform the lake below. And if I just cut across to actually this picture, here we have Abergynolwyn looking sort of the other way. But the shelter is very much, I think, is the same as what's in the early years, because I'm modelling 1949, 1959, that 10-year period on the Skarloey. The little difference I'm going to do, there's nothing sort of official canon for it. All the green sections on the shelter, I'm going to pick out in the blue, the same blue that you see on the Skarloey coaches. I just think it looked quite nice.
Yeah. Right. So, shall we open the floor to some questions, maybe?
We have the mineral section line to go on to.
Sorry?
No, that's all right. We'll quickly get through this and then we'll get into some questions. So here we have the quarry up at the Ben Glass Valley. For those that don't know, the actual proper name for the Skarloey Valley is the Howin-Dewey. There's some misspellings on some of the maps that say Dawley, but in the Island of Sodor book and other unpublished works that are in the Awdry study, it's very much Howin-Dewey, which is the main valley, which Skarloey Station sort of is the head of the valley, but then the railway continues round into a side valley, which is the Ben Glass Valley, and I often call it the Ben Glass Quarry.
And the actual mountain they're on's Ward Fell.
Yes.
So you've got kind of like it's Ward Fell Mountain and the quarries in there, and this is the where the railway meets at the bottom of all the inclines.
And if I show this next photo from the 1930s, which is one of my favourites, there we have Talyllyn, or it could be, it could be Skarloey. We have Talyllyn at Nant Gwernol, and the main difference really is that there is a water feed, which is, I think, Wilbert's
based on
the Teedower water trough, which is between Nant Gwernol and Abergynolwyn.
Yeah, so if you pop back onto the illustration, so the main difference here is you've got where Peter Sam is, you've got another line behind him there. He's on the middle line, and then you've got the one closest. And then that water tower there, as Tom was saying, is based on Teedower, which is an old water tower, which is sadly been lost on the actual Talyllyn. There you go. It's been lost on the actual Talyllyn, but there is the money was raised and it is being rebuilt at the minute. So you shall soon be able to see this site on the Talyllyn again, probably in a couple of years. At this point with all the delays, but it's a site to look forward to.
This is some of our viewers may have noticed, of course, Edward Thomas is there, so this is a very early preservation photograph, and it's very rare. Once we get into preservation, the engines often went up that far. So I think this is a very it's obviously after number 4 had come back from its overhaul at Hunslet. Something I've noticed, Lou, we've never discussed this, but this has just made me realise something. Number 4 has a piece of wood underneath the buffer beam.
Yeah, and that was Chorus, I think. Actually, no, sorry. That is that was added. Same reasoning as Sir Hayden and Sir Handel.
So, question is, are we going to put it on our Peter Sam models?
Because he's got buffers on mine.
Whereas I will be going for the earlier version to match my Sir Handel.
Right.
And I think that is about everything. I will stop the sharing there. So yeah, I hope that's been interesting so far. But yeah, let's open the floor. Any questions we have about the railway series and Awdry and
one thing that I did notice is quite earlier on, Lucas, I think his name was asking about volunteering with the Talyllyn, and I'm biased. I'm wearing the tie. I'm very biased, but please do come down when it's back open. Come down. There is a volunteer hostel, which is £4 a night for volunteers. You can stay there, and it's got a kitchen, it's got everything you need. And you're asking about food as well, so volunteers get discount on the food, and it's up to you what you want to do. You can pay every day to get it from the cafes. Or you can make it yourself in the kitchen at the hostel, or go to Co-op and buy something and prepare it. It's all up to you. But the food is down to you. But yeah, there are facilities on the railway to provide that. It's one of those things. And yeah, as Poggle just said in the chat, there is an under 16s course to introduce you to the railway, because we can't take any volunteers on underneath under 16 without kind of a parent being present or given the consent. And we do have an under 16s training course for that, just to give you a bit of a taste. If you are under 16, you can go, this is what you can do, let's do it. Do you want to come back?
Question from Two-Faced Heart Productions, really good question as well. At what point did Edward Thomas and Sir Hayden gain their buffers on the Talyllyn Railway? I think, if I'm correct, Sir Hayden gets them before Edward Thomas. I think
it's Sir Hayden
55.
54.
Is it 54 for Sir Hayden and 55 for Edward Thomas?
I can't tell you Edward Thomas off the top of my head, but I want to say that's about right. It's definitely I think it's about mid 1954 that Sir Hayden got the buffers, and I genuinely can't remember off the top of my head for Edward Thomas, I'm afraid. But yeah.
Question from Reese: is there any secret Sodor law in the study at Talyllyn? For example, I've long felt that the official height difficulty value is too low, and I suspect Wilbert revised it. There is other material in the study. Can't think off the top of my head if there's anything that mentions about Cooldy Fell's height. Something's telling me it's revised in a later from an earlier map into a later. I might be wrong.
I'm not too sure, honestly, but yeah, there's some folders full of kind of like Wilbert's handwritten notes and some typed up pages which do have extra information. But there's a current, essentially. We'd love to go into it because, like I say, I've had a read of it when I was in there. But there's a bit of we don't really know who owns it, if it belongs to the Narrow Gauge Railway Museum, the Awdry family, or Mattel. So we don't want to get into that, sadly. But fingers crossed that will one day be available to read online or in some form. That's the goal.
Steve mentions that there's a revised figure in the surprise packet. Ben also says he doesn't. The only one the map had. I think only one map had the height on. I think it might be on the 58, which I could check. But it is marked, I think, on the 71, which is one that the 1971 map is what is behind Luke there. Which actually, although it has inaccuracies as a map, it is my favourite because it's
lovely. But yeah, from Tidmouth Yard and the Jam Tram, they've asked when Edward Thomas's running board was fitted, and that was the 1958 season.
I think we were talking about that from a modelling perspective.
The other night, yeah. Yeah, so that was 1958. So, Lucas, my advice for this is email the volunteer coordinators at the Talyllyn and ask about the Graham Guildford Fund or the fund, because I can't remember what the ages are, but you can apply for a bursary if you're coming down to stay for long. I think it's between 3 and 6 weeks. If you're going to come down between 3 and 6 weeks for volunteering, you can apply for the bursary, which means you'll get the hostel paid for you and £5 a day for food. So that if you do want to come down, you're eligible to that being 17, as you said before. So yeah, email them about that, see what you can do, because you'll definitely be able to get a bit more money, and that should, loosen your budget and make it easier. It's what I've done for the past 2 years.
Reece says the map behind you has the height for some of the peaks. Yes, it does. That's what I do like about that map, that it has. It does have the peaks. I find the northern section of Sodor fascinating. I just go over maps looking at that. Like, Skarloey, the Skarloey area, north of Peel Godred.
Lovely map. Smurfy Dan, this one. That's my favourite.
Yeah, I think it's one of those. That is my favourite visually. The 1992 is for accuracy. That's the one I will look at for, because there's certain additions on it that are missing on other ones. Ginty Steam. Something I never studied is that Elsbridge illustration similar. Is that Elsbridge? It's in the TV series.
Now, Ginty Steam, the illustrations you've seen in the Railway series are not of Elsbridge, they are of Knapford. And this is where one of the problems stems, because the TV series
from day one did its own thing.
Yeah, from series one they changed a lot of the names. So I know you can't really see the map much, but Tidmouth is here, and that is the big station. Here is Knapford, and that is the brilliant.
Hold on, there we go.
Yeah, so Knapford's there, and that is the junction that meets the main line, and that is that's what Elsbridge was in the TV series for some reason. When Elsbridge, as you say, is all the way up here, so there's quite a gap there. Elsbridge is just another station on the branch line in actuality, but the TV series decided to make a model, an absolutely really, really nice model of Knapford, and then put the Elsbridge name on it for some reason. Yeah, so it's one of those things. There's a few discrepancies, but essentially Elsbridge in the TV series should be called Knapford, and Knapford in the TV series should be called Tidmouth. And there is no Elsbridge set in the TV series, really, because that's completely different design-wise. It's just one of those things that for some reason got overlooked and changed.
Message from the TR. Has everyone watching visitors in the past or planning to go in the future? Definitely the answer should be either yes or I am going to visit. That should be. Yeah,
I'm missing it. I want to get down as soon as I can.
When was your first visit, Luke?
I've always wanted to go. I always wanted to go since I was a kid. Couldn't afford it though. So it was 2016. That was the first time I went down to volunteer. I went for a few days. Got a bed and breakfast. Like my parents, they wanted like a little holiday away, and I said I've really wanted to go here for years because I was 17 at the time. And yes, so they took that, and they had some lovely. They had some days out away from Towyn, and I spent all my time in Towyn. And yeah, so I did that, and it was really, really good. And I came back the next year volunteering. And then the year after that, and last year, and this year. Well, fingers crossed this year.
I went on my first holiday to Wales back in 2002. We stayed up at Llanberis, went on Snowdon, and I was desperate to go to the TR, but I was told, sorry, it's too far. And we never went on that holiday. It wasn't until 2007 that I visited the TR for the first time. And I'm not just saying this, it was magical. It's a very lovely feeling. And I'll never forget, my favourite character is Skarloey. And I'll never forget, I think we were behind Dolgok, and we got to Brynglas, and I look out, and there is Talyllyn in that lovely LNWR or stroke BR black livery.
Yeah, the chap who painted it would have you hide for calling it BR livery. Yeah, no, it was quite funny. I
did say LNWR first.
Yeah, it's just quite funny. But yeah, it was when I went. I just had such a good time. Everyone was so friendly, and it's one of the main reasons I keep going back so much. It's the people. There's such a family feel to it. You never feel left out or anything like that. It's genuinely just the nicest place. Genuinely.
Incidentally, I have just, I've almost finished. Well, let's reach this because this wasn't planned. This book.
Yeah, 60 years of volunteering on the
And
Talyllyn.
there's some of you may recognise this gentleman who briefly joined us on Awdry Corner the other week, but sadly his internet. There we are, Andrew Robinson.
Yeah, these one of the men have grown up with the stories and has gone to volunteer. There's a good few.
There's Mr. Anthony Cools, the senior curator at the National Railway Museum.
Yeah, there are a lot of fans, young and old, at the railway. And also, just to Golden Eagle Studios, you're all the way in the USA, but don't let that stop you. If you can get over, come over, and I'm sure the railway will be able to, sort. Like I say, there's a hostel to stay in, and we've got volunteers. We have volunteers from Canada, America, Japan, Australia, Denmark, Hungary, I believe, and the South. No, yeah, no. There's Scotland and Ireland. There's people from all over the world, genuinely. And there's just something about the railway that gets people from all over.
Oh, sorry, I've clicked the wrong thing. Hold on.
That's an example there. All the way from.
There we go. So, and we also, is there anything lesser known about the line that you'd wish had been made its way into the books? Yes, the Winding House.
Yes, yeah. There's.
I'm gonna pull up a picture of this because some people might not. Fairness, Luke suggested we did this, and I was like, oh, so I apologise, Luke. Yes, we should have put this in.
I got pictures ready.
The Winding House. Luke, talk us through at Abergynolwyn when you have the Winding House. And
yeah, so at Abergynolwyn Station, which is, as I say, the top station back then, it's now Gwernol. Just if you carried on down the line, there was a winding house, much like the inclines, but it went off of the main line of the railway down into the village of Abergynolwyn, and the Skarloey Railway does have one similar. It goes down into the village of Skarloey. I believe, if it's around the map here, I believe. So it's on. Yeah, and it goes down there. I'd like to kind of see more of the Quarry line as well. One thing that I'd like to see more of, though, which it's mentioned in the lesser known stuff about the line, it's mentioned in some of the material that we talked about that is in the study, is kind of the period when the Sodor and Mainland Railway, which predates the main Northwestern Railway, which is in the books. It's one of essentially the pre-grouping companies for it, if you would. That essentially stopped running in 1901, and in this extra materials, the Skarloey Railway is said to have laid an extra rail all the way down from Crovan's Gate all the way to Kirk Ronan here, and essentially had their own, the little narrow gauge locos doing the whole trip down to Kirk Ronan with the slate directly.
Dual gauge.
Dual gauge, yeah, and obviously when the Northwestern came around, they ripped it up and just ran it.
They quickly said, "No, get back to your narrow gauge railway. Thank you very much."
But yeah, and obviously it's stuff like it's unpublished, so it is questionable if Wilbert would have wanted that to be part of the official stuff. But it's one of those things where it's like the document in there is essentially a binder with his lecture notes, because in the 80s he did lectures in the foreword of the Island of Sodor book. He said that he did lectures, and that information's in there. So I'm keen to believe if it's in there and he's told people. I believe the only reason it's not in the book is due to limitations and word count.
Luke, I have got the Winding House pictures, so I will. Actually, that's hold on.
Well, with that, Steve, you'd have one running the railway and one running the slate trains down to Kirk Ronan.
Am I right? It infers that Skarloey was doing the Kirk Ronan runs and Dolgok was doing the
yes, which is why Skarloey was quite worn out, even more so.
So what you're looking at there, that is the winding house. You'll notice that there's some tracks that go diagonally through opposite. You can see Talyllyn there with some empty slate wagons, which is Talyllyn will be coming towards the camera because she's propelling the empties up to the quarry. There was another line that went behind the winding house with a turntable, because the wagons for Abergynolwyn village would go down this incline like that. So in that other photo, where I've got the cursor now is roughly where. Oh no, it might be the other. So hold on.
No, you were correct.
I was correct. Yeah, Talyllyn would be about there. Any wagons that go down to Abergynolwyn would go down said incline. It's such a shame that that's all. It's all gone now.
Yeah, but yeah, right.
I was just going to quickly say the only difference with the Skarloey is the winding house. The incline goes down the opposite hillside.
Yeah,
that's the only difference.
But yeah, so I think there we go. We've hit the hour mark, and
well, I think first of all, I think we'd both like to thank the Talyllyn Railway for asking us to do this, because it's been absolute honour. So if you can and you really want to operate the Reverend's layout, there is a link in the description of the video to the auction site, and I think it's at £310. I think when I last.
Yeah, I believe it's £310. Obviously, it is quite a big price, but it is a priceless opportunity. I'm quickly going to answer that question from Ginty Steam there. Duke was not regauged. Duke was built for the 2'3" gauge, unlike the other George Englands, because the mid Sodor was 2'3" gauge as well. A lot of people seem to think Duke was built like for the Festiniog and then was sold to the mid Sodor, but Duke was custom, built to order for the mid Sodor Railway at 2'3" inch. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I'll go back to the closing spiel. So.
Just to point this up, we talked about this on Awdry Corner. Cough, Mountaineer. I'm liking the theory about Mountaineer. There we go.
There we are. No, thank you very much for asking us to do this. It's definitely an honour. And as I say, the price on the layout is, it's high at the minute, but like I say, it's priceless. But if you can't afford that, anything you can afford to donate would be most greatly appreciated.
Absolutely.
They've got a fundraiser, or I think it's on Just Giving, and absolutely anything would be amazing, because the railway, will definitely need it in the coming months. As I said at the start of the stream, it's definitely going to be one of the ones that reopens the last for like businesses due to it being a tourist attraction, and you can't really social distance on very cramped narrow gauge coaches, let alone the footplate. So yeah, and anything you can give would be amazing.
Absolutely. And one last thing, I'd just like to say thank you to that man there, because the joy he has brought. I don't know if he ever thought that there would be groups of us who are sat around going over his maps and things. I'd like to think he'd be really pleased that we get so much enjoyment looking into the details of stuff that him and George both. So I'd just like to say thank you, Wilbert, and thank you, George, for creating this wonderful island and these railways and characters.
Thank you for introducing me and many others to the Talyllyn as well.
Absolutely.
And steam heritage and railways, and And Timothy Coyne. If you look at the narrow gauge episode of Awdry Corner, you'll find some a bit more chatter on it there.
So take care, everyone, and
very much.
Thanks again. Bye.
Bye now.